Hi, my name's Kathy Skipper and I'm a menopause midwife. Welcome to my channel, The Alchemy of Menopause. This is a more practical video, so you'll need a pen and paper. I'm going to look at how we were educated as girls and how that education, depending on our culture, community, family, education, affected our identity as women. Because as you know, if we go through the internal process, which is the depth psychology approach to menopause, then we are going to be confronted with the need to reclaim parts of ourselves that we have either abandoned, buried, didn't know they existed because of our education. And so it's a good starting point for this is to see, well, how was I educated to identify as a girl? And is the way that I was educated and is the way that I identify as feminine um, truly feminine, or are parts of this things that have been falsely identified with the feminine due to the patriarchal system, because the patriarchal system wants women to be a type of woman that fits into the patriarchal system. Okay, it's a bit complicated, but it'll make sense as we go along. So you'll need, as I said, a pen or paper. And remembering that the quest of the internal process, or one of the quests of the internal process of menopause, is to piece back together the fragmented pieces of the feminine or parts of our feminine. I always see it like a quilt, women sewing bits of quilt together to make a beautiful quilt. In a way, that underworld journey of perimenopause is like piecing these parts of ourselves together that we've lost over our lifetime and over generations, and we piece them together to create a whole version of ourselves, a whole sovereign woman who will go forward into the world. Okay, so the first question. So you can put me on pause and answer your own question. I'll answer it a little bit to give you an idea of my journey, and we'll go from there. So the first question is, how did I feel about myself growing up as a little girl? So me personally, I liked being a girl. I didn't ever think I wanted to be a boy, even though when I was born, my part of my birth story is my mum always wanted a boy. She'd brought up her sister's two sons, and so she told me that she knew about boys, but I think it was deeper than that. Um, she didn't want a girl because she was denying her own mother line, and I would be part of that. Um, yeah, I liked being a girl, even though I was a girl that liked climbing trees and going outside and running about and getting dirty. Um, but I also loved dolls and nurturing my dollies and being a very sort of girly girl. Yeah, so that was me. So how did you feel? When you go back to that little girl time in your life, how did you feel about being a female child? Okay. Question 2. What was your relationship like with your mother? This is huge because there's this thing in depth psychology called the mother-daughter split, where the daughter goes off and sort of denies the parts of herself that she identifies with the mother. That's part of the heroine's journey, and I will do a video on that, I think probably next week. But let's just stick to the question. What was your relationship like with your mum? So mine was very close. I was her only biological child. Um, it was close, but I felt a sort of repulsion as well. Physically, I didn't want to be near her. Even as a little girl, it sort of repulsed me, and I always found that worrying. I didn't know why. And she also made me very, very angry. I think I sensed, looking back, I think I sensed this sort of act that she was always putting on. But she was also very nurturing. Um, she looked after me. I knew she was there. She was present. She could be bitchy. I remember when I was about 13, 14, I had a job in the local supermarket, so I had a bit of money. I dyed my hair with henna. She came into the supermarket. I was on the till. She came to my till and just looked at me and said, tart. Um, she didn't want to talk about anything about the body, so I grew up very dissociated from the body. Um, yeah, my mum was very present, as I said, physically, but she was dissociated herself. She'd come from a very traumatic background, and so she wasn't there emotionally or mentally. She was there physically, cooking, doing those things. I didn't want for anything, but she wasn't there on an emotional level at all. You couldn't talk about feelings, you couldn't talk about sex, you couldn't talk about anything that wasn't within a certain, very closed sphere. And if you're interested in the mother-daughter relationship, Marion Woodman wrote a book called Addicted to Perfection, which is where, the daughter learns very quickly that to be accepted within the family, accepted by her mother, she has to be perfect, or she has to be perfect in the eyes of the mother. And that creates, even if the child isn't cognitively or consciously aware of it, a great rage, because she realizes she's being loved conditionally, not unconditionally. I love you, and the subliminal message is if you're a certain way. And so many mothers who grew up in very strict patriarchal value systems, they teach their daughters to fit into the patriarchal system of the time. They want their daughters to be safe in it. They want their daughters to succeed in it. And they want that more than acknowledging the entirety of their daughter's existence. And that's a problem in society. Marion Woodman says, it's called the death mother archetype, and it's rampant. So one question when you're thinking about what your relationship like with your mother, and this is a very important question, so jot it down, but when you answer it, don't overthink it. Allow it to sort of come up from a deeper place in yourself. So this question is, what did your mother unconsciously ask you to carry for her? So in depth psychology, yes, our parents are there to clothe us, love us, make sure we're safe, educate us, make sure we're doing what's right, and that we have the possibility of being able to be independent, or whatever it is that parents are supposed to do. But one thing that isn't talked about that parents do automatically until they become conscious and then try and reel it in is that they unconsciously ask their children to carry their shadows or to carry their unfulfilled light. So a helicopter parent who wished she had been a dancer will, push her little girl to dance every hour of the day, every dance class there is. She's asking her to live her unfulfilled life. She's not really asking the daughter what she wants. And this can be like a helicopter parent, or it can be like my mother, who denied her roots. She was born in India, as I said, to a line of women from a mixed race community in India. And when she got to England, she decided she passed as white, she was going to be white. So she denied her roots. So they became part of her shadow, that shame, that marginality, not feeling she fitted in. And she asked me to carry that unconsciously. They don't do it it's not on purpose, but it's a very important question when we're looking at these relationships with our mothers. So what did your mother unconsciously ask her to carry for you? Okay, next question. How did your mother feel about being a woman? That's a big question. I know my mum, she was very much the woman in terms of making herself small in relationship to the masculine, and my father, even though my mother was much more intelligent, my father's on the spectrum, she was much more brilliant, well read, she would make herself small in order to let him be in his place of patriarch. So on that level, she was very much the woman of her time, or of her time where she grew up, the community she grew up in, where men had all the power. But on another level, she was disconnected from her sensuality, from herself as a woman, from her embodiment. Um, I think that part of being a woman was very dangerous to my mother. I think, I mean, I'm not going to go into the details now, but she was sort of reacting to her own mother, who in India, in Calcutta, as a mixed race woman, had really only one thing that society would see her for, and that was her sexuality. And I think my mother reacted to that and became very sort of nun-like. And also probably because of trauma, she cut herself off from her body. Okay, next question. What did your mother teach you about being a mother, about being, sorry, but again, what did your mother teach you about being a woman? So when I think about that, what did my mum teach me about being a woman? Well, she taught me to be powerless faced with a man. She taught me that I needed a man because I was a woman in order to survive. She taught me that whatever my education and however great I could be in the world, I would never be anything without a man. She taught me that at the same time that I had to mistrust men. So I needed men, but I must mistrust them because they're all going to go off with another woman and they're not trustworthy. So I had this very double message. Um, she taught me that there was a deep grief in the relationship with the mother. Her mother died young, and my mother never got over it. She had this sort of mantra, my mother died, and she'd sort of lament it decades after her mother had died. And I think deep down, now I know the story of my mother line, it was really some kind of unconscious mourning for the fact that we were separated from the mother energy, from the mother line, from the feminine, deep feminine energy. She didn't know that, but she sort of unconsciously felt that. So there was this deep grief around the mother. She taught me that mothers were panicky, worrying, always near hysteria, and that sounds awful to say because women are sort of often labeled as hysteric, but my mum was, because she was disembodied and always worried that something was going to go wrong. And she taught me to hate my body and sex, and that, lie back and think of England. Okay, so what did your mother teach you about being a woman? Next question. Did you admire your mother? How did your mother inspire you? Well, one thing I admired about my mother was her humor. She had a very good sense of humor, so she could keep a party going and make everybody laugh, and she did. So that I really did admire about her. But she wasn't inspiring because she made herself so small when she could have been so much greater than she was. And that now makes me sad. It used to make me angry. Now it makes me sad. Now that I understand her more. I admired her as a grandmother. She was a much better grandmother than she was a mother to my sons. I have 4 sons, and she was a very good grandmother to the 2 older ones. By the time the 2 younger ones were older, she had dementia. It was too late. She had me very late. Okay, next one. What are your mother's values that you now find yourself embodying? So we unconsciously and subliminally take on things from our mothers. So what did you take on that was sort of a value of your mother's that you now find yourself embodying? And it might be values that you really honor, or it could be values that you find that you'd really like to get rid of. So again, one of the values is the value of humor. Humor to bring people together in a way. That I've embodied, I hope. And also the other thing the value that I think I embodied that I really like from my mum was her family was important. Even though she denied her Anglo-Indian roots, she lived them. And so the sense of family was very, very important. And I have that. I have a big family, and I find it very important. We're getting near the end. Next question. What did your mother teach you about your body? What did your mother teach you about your body? And this is a huge question because we learn about our bodies, our feminine bodies, our embodiment through our mothers as little girls. And I think because our mothers, or many of our mothers, have been so dissociated and so cut off from their deep feminineness that we have learned. Well, I know myself, let me talk about myself. She taught me not to like my body, not to be embodied, to not want to feel or be sort of connected to anything in terms of my embodiment or the functions of my body. When I got my period, I think she gave me some money for some female sanitary stuff, but that was it. Never mentioned again. Um, she taught me not to like being touched because she hated her body so much, and I didn't even want her to touch me as a very small child. And so being touched for me has always been very difficult. I've had to work on that. She taught me not to do anything to enrich my body, not to look after it, not to love it. She'd sit there. I remember she'd sit there in the living room, and I was an adolescent. I'd come in, had a curfew, had to be in by, I don't know, 9:30, and I'd come in and she was watching the telly knitting, and she'd be sitting there with these dry, dry feet and dry, flaky legs, and she wouldn't do anything about it. She wouldn't look after herself. So she didn't teach me self-care. I had to really learn it myself, and it was a long journey. It was hard for me to love my body and to look after it. And if I did anything, to make myself feel good as an adolescent, then I'd be a tart or you know, and she taught me not to desire intimacy in any way or sensuality in any way. What did your mother teach you about sexuality? Well, this is probably a crossover. As I said, my mother taught me that we were disembodied and nothing at all about sexuality. Even if it was on the television, you could feel the sort of. She disapproved of it. She never wanted to talk about it. It didn't exist. I mean, I don't even know how they conceived me. And non-verbally, she taught me that sexuality was, dangerous, dirty, unclean, unladylike. All these. I mean, and now I'm talking about it. It's crazy. How did your mother condition you to be a good girl? What was being a good girl? Well, for me, it was not being angry, not being rude, being very polite, being squeaky clean, talking Queen's English, putting others first, being seen and not heard, behaving how others wanted me to behave, being marriable. So this good girl thing is huge in terms of how women over generations in this patriarchal value system have been brought up. Being a good girl. So that's sort of the opposite often of being an empowered woman. Okay, what parts of you weren't allowed to be expressed or to come through as a young girl? So again, there might be some crossovers with the other questions, but mine were obviously my sexuality, my anger, my roots, my Anglo-Indianness, my mixed race roots, and my feelings. Feelings weren't accepted. I remember coming home from school one day, I was about 14. I remember I started to realize I was feeling depressed. I thought, I'm going to tell mum. And I tried to tell her about it. And, oh, don't be silly, Catherine. Don't be so silly. You can't be depressed at your age. And that was it. What were your ambitions and your dreams before you were menstruating? Well, I've done a whole video on this. Um, Mine was singing, but I squelched that very early on. I've talked about that in a former video. I loved nurturing others. I mean, I've got 4 children, and I think that was something that I knew as a child. I had lots of dollies when I was little. I wanted to nurture others. I loved babies. I loved animals, plants. I've worked with plants all my life, and I loved nature and plants and animals. I liked adventures, and I live now, I grew up in suburban England, and I live up a mountain in Taos, New Mexico. So my life has been an adventure. I've been on the road for a couple of years with a yurt and a cart and my kids. I took my young kids to India for a year. So that adventurous nature was there as a child. Um, but so, as I said, was this nurturing quality and this loved playing outside and nature. So what about you? What were your dreams, your ambitions? I mean, in terms of ambitions, I'm not sure what my ambitions were. Um, I'm not sure I allowed myself any ambitions except for to have children, to be a mum. When did you first encounter the limitations of being a girl and realizing that being a girl had certain limitations to it? So for me, I think it was the day I was born. As I said, my mum wanted a boy because she thought they were easier and she knew what to do with the boys. I think I had less freedom, always worried about me. Um, More neurosis was passed down, more false myths about how to be in the world and how to be in terms of the relationship with the masculine. My father, who's on the spectrum and had challenges intellectually. I mean, he wasn't stupid. He was very practical, but he wasn't intellectual. I remember I had to make sure I never passed him, never made him feel small. My mum did the same, and I was taught to do that as well. So intellectually, I couldn't sort of excel because I mustn't ever. The unconscious message was you must never go past your dad, and that wasn't difficult. Um, yeah, so my underlying education from home was to prepare me for marriage to the right person. The mantra was marry for love, but love where money is. That was the mantra I got. So, how about you? When did you first encounter the limitations of being a girl compared to being a boy? Okay. Do you have any memories of splitting off from being female in your body? Was there any moment where you felt that you were either emotionally denying parts of yourself or your dreams or your goals, sort of splitting off, that something was happening that you couldn't be fully yourself? There was a split. And I remember this. I mean, this expressed itself in my life through drugs. I got very, very into cannabis as a young woman. Um, Toxic relationships. I gave myself away to the most horrendous relationships. I had a lot of physical abuse in these relationships, mental abuse. Um, I didn't feel I could choose anything. There was no me to, the part of me that would choose, the virgin self that is who I really am, my true essence, wasn't available to me. So I couldn't make choices that were based on who I really am. So I didn't really make choices. I let life kind of happen to me. Um, yeah. And the main thing was I gave myself over to men. They could do anything with me. I didn't have the right over my own body. I mean, this is horrific as I'm saying this, but you can see how this exercise is very helpful for us to see how we were educated and what we need to change. Um, yeah, you can also ask yourself the question, who were you influenced by in terms of female characters, either in the media, in films, in literature? And again, stories were difficult for me because I couldn't tell my own story, and my mum lied about our story, our motherline story. I think I had an aversion to stories. They hit me in a way that was painful. So I didn't watch films. I read, I liked things like there was a book called The Secret Garden when I was little, which again, I think spoke to my need to be in nature and alone. I was an introvert. There was a book called Ballet Shoes. So there was the dancing aspect that I would have loved to do that never allowed myself to do, didn't think I could do. And there was a film called it wasn't a film, it was a series on British television called Tomorrow's People. And it was about this group of children who were psychic. And, I mean, I can't remember the details. I did look it up not long ago. But anyway, I liked that. So maybe there was something about this other realms, let's say. I think I had a desire to explore other realms even as a child. And lastly, did you have any female mentors who inspired you beyond your mother, and inspired you in the way that you lived? And I think for me, female mentors came in a little bit later when I was in my early 20s. So I had two very young children. I had my children young, my first two. When I was 23, I had my first son, and by the time I was 24, I had two young sons. And I was living in France, in a sort of community of teepees, and there was a woman there, a French woman who was very strong, and she had older children than me. They were sort of 8 and 10 when mine were babies. And she taught me to be strong. She taught me the women had to be strong. She gave me no, I couldn't speak English, and I didn't find out until I said goodbye to her sort of 18 months later that she spoke perfect English, but she wouldn't give me any help. Her way of helping me was to be hard, but she taught me to be stronger. She taught me what a stronger woman was, living sort of up a hill in a teepee with children. Her children were always perfectly, clean and presented, even though she was living in the wild. So she was a big inspiration in my life. And another woman called Carly, who was very witchy. When I went back to the UK with my kids for a period, she was there, and she was very witchy, and she got me into sort of uh, these other ways of looking at things, and oracle cards, and we'd sit for hours, and she had a goat, and we'd drink coffee with her goat's milk. And she was an inspiration. She was much older than me, and she was an inspiration. She was a woman unlike my mum, I suppose. And the other inspiration for me, and I have to say it, and I'll end on this, is I live in the wild, as you can probably see from this, and there are a lot of bears here. And since I've been living here for the last 10 years, bears, mama bears, have been a great inspiration. And they are very symbolic of the unconscious, of the feminine unconscious, of the unconscious of that maternal, fierce mother. Bears go into the earth for a big portion of the year, held by the earth, and then they come out and they'll go back in again. They do this sort of semi-hibernation, and they're extremely powerful creatures and mothers, and connected to the earth. So yeah, bears have been an inspiration to me as well. Okay, so those are the questions. And the reason why I think this is interesting is because if we're going to, in menopause, really dive into the journey of what do I need to reclaim? What parts of myself have I abandoned? Did my mother abandon? Did my grandmother abandon? Where is that shadow in my mother line? That sort of feminine shadow, the dark goddess that has been for generations negated, denigrated, buried for fear that she might come out and be burnt at the stake. So, this is one of the stages in this work. We can't really go and reclaim the parts of ourselves that are so deep and so powerful if we aren't aware of how we've been educated, how our identity as young girls um, began, and what parts of that we've needed to expose for what they are and where they came from. So I hope this was at least interesting. Lots of love.